The NHS used to be the pride of Britain. In surveys, you'd see that the things that made you proud to be British were the Queen and the NHS. Well, we don't have the Queen anymore, and we've seen what's happening with the royal family. Harry and Meghan last night being cheered, frankly, in America for receiving this award. There was one heckle, we understand, outside, but that's...
I wasn't there.
You weren't there, Andrew, but you probably would have heckled. The NHS, I think everybody would agree we're proud of the people who work for the NHS, but, Kevin, where is the vision for the NHS right now? What is the future? When we hear that our parents may not have an ambulance if they trip and fall on the day that the ambulances go out on strike, if we hear that there may be a shortage of the drugs which will save lives, the nurses are forced into the first strike just before Christmas. I mean, has the government got an answer? It just feels like it's firefighting on every level right now, but with no big vision.
No, well, we clapped them. We've now got to pay them. I mean, that's what it's about. People who work in the NHS, yes, they're dedicated, they're professional, they care, but they also have bills to pay. And they've been pushed to the edge. It's the closest we have to a national religion, I think, the NHS. Huge public support, performs miracles, incredible levels of care, but at the same time, you can see all the problems now with waiting lists, a record 7 million, and nurses, as you say, first national strike in the Royal College of Nursing's history. Ambulance crews haven't been on strike nationally since 1989-90. I remember covering it then. It's because, you know, they're dedicated, they're professional, they care, but they go home, they've got to pay their energy bills, their food bills, just like everybody else. And the government doesn't have a plan. I think the problem now is it's run away from the government. It's going to be very hard.
That's what it feels like,
yeah, very hard to get a grip. But somehow they've got to. Stephen Barclay has to get on to the Chancellor, has to get on to the Prime Minister, and they've got to come up with a coherent plan. There's no workforce plan, we know. That's why there's, 100,000 plus shortage of doctors, nurses and others. This is harming people's care, and it is a matter of life and death. I know some people will criticise the nurses, you probably about to, and the ambulance crews, but they have bills to pay too.
I'm not going to criticise the nurses. Look, they do an incredible job, and they've never been paid enough. And I think it's desperate, the situation we're in. But we know, as a result of the pandemic, the waiting lists have hit these record highs. The government spent vast...
Actually, that was before the pandemic.
They were rising before.
But the government has spent trillions of pounds on the money's simply not there. But they've got to find a way to get the nurses back to work, I think. But they're not going to get a 19% pay rise. And I don't think the Labour Party would accept that could possibly be affordable.
I think... And it's billions, not trillions. But...
yeah, billions.
I think one of the issues we have to remember, we're talking about strikes and we're talking about the impacts of strikes now, but what we're seeing in the newspapers, people sitting in a neighbouring to a hospital and waiting 7 hours for an ambulance, even though they can see the hospital across the road, is without strike action.
This was the 85-year-old man with terminal cancer who waited 7 hours for an ambulance, despite living directly across the road from his local hospital in North Wales.
That is a direct failure of this government and the previous government and the previous government. Tory government's been in power for 12 years now to deal with the social care issue. Yes. Beds are filled with older people who shouldn't be in hospital, but there's nowhere for them to go.
We know what the
care
problems
homes.
are. The trouble is, where are the solutions?
And the social care plan has been put back again.
Labour trebled spending on the NHS and left it in a fitter state. Then through the Cameron period, and Jeremy Hunt, who's now the Chancellor, became the longest-serving health secretary in the NHS's history. He put it into the tightest financial straitjacket ever, the tightest since 1948, and much larger amounts of money are going in now, but you've got a system that almost had the life squeezed out of it for year after year, and that includes the pay of nurses, ambulance crews, others who work in it, and they're trying to catch up.
The thing that really worries me when you look at this, it's all very well to talk about recruiting new staff. Well, when you have strikes, clearly existing staff are unhappy. It's a pretty, tangible way of demonstrating that. Retention is arguably more important than recruitment. And there is obviously just by the fact people are striking, going to be a retention problem of staffing in the NHS. Ambulance workers and nurses, clearly, but other sectors too. And so, I mean, the worry is we're at a tipping point right now. Can the government turn this around?
Well, I don't know. Look, they're not going to pay the nurses what they're asking for. That's simply not going to happen. It's not. They're getting a £1,400 pay rise. That was part of from an independent pay review body, but the union's saying that's not enough because it doesn't make up for the money they lost in the previous years. Yeah. I think they'll find some, but they're not going to find what the unions want, so I can't see how it's going to be resolved.
I've covered industrial disputes all the way back to the 80s, the 1980s, not the 1880s. And I've seen negotiations. Yes, you ask for 19%, but you don't expect really, in truth, to get 19%. But if you ask for 2%, you'll end up with 1%. So you meet somewhere in the middle. But where are the negotiations? Why isn't the Health Secretary sitting down and opening and talking about longer-term planning?
Well, he's going to be on the programme this morning.
I was just going to say, there is an argument that there's a tactical... politically, there's a tactical move that if you delay action and the strikes carry on, the sympathy moves away from the strikers and towards the government and towards everything that's going on.
I think that's going to happen with the rail workers, for instance. With this
do you think that's deliberate strategy?
Well, I think it is with... I don't think that's the case with the NHS. That would be too cynical, Martin. But I think with the rail workers, I think there's no doubt. That's an own goal.
You may remember that Mick Lynch...
Yeah. You called him Grinch.
Well, I didn't call him a Grinch.
Yeah.
He referred to himself as the Grinch.
He is the Grinch.
On camera and denied that he was one. Yeah. So I asked him, are you the Grinch that stole Christmas? This was on the 23rd of November. He made a pledge about whether they would strike at Christmas time. On Good Morning Britain, on the 23rd of November, here it is. How are you not the Grinch who's
every day is sensitive. There's no good time to have a strike. We have deliberately left the Christmas period...
Oh, come on, you've done it deliberately in the run-up to Christmas and afterwards.
You asked me a question about Christmas. We have left the Christmas period strike-free, deliberately. We cannot leave this action to go cold. We've not been on strike for 2 months. We moved other dates to facilitate important public and national events.
He had left 2 weeks ago. They left the Christmas period strike-free. And now not any longer.
4 days, and it's deliberately designed, and it will wreck people's Christmas plans.
So now they're going out and striking on Christmas Eve.
But the reason
public support will collapse for the RMT.
The reason he left it open is he hoped there'd be progress in the talks. And now he says,
Christmas.
No,
they are going to destroy Christmas.
I have sympathy for people who stand up for themselves at work when they've been offered 4%. It's been dressed up as 8%, but it's 4% each year. But inflation, consumer prices index, 11.1%. Retail prices index, which includes mortgage payments, 14.2%.
Kevin, on the side of ruining Christmas.
That is a huge cut in your standard of living. And wages are going up quite a bit faster in the private sector than they are in the public sector.
But I wonder whether, Martin raised the point.
In private, 2.2.
Surely they need public support on their side.
And you risk alienating the public. There's no question of that. Although, let's be honest about this, the biggest disruption for most train travellers over the Christmas New Year period will be from the companies themselves when they shut down parts of the network for engineering and maintenance work. Now, maybe that's vital and that's important. I'm not disputing that, but nevertheless, the companies will create more disruption.
Eve travel, though, will be disrupted by the strikes. It's the day or two after that will tend to be
people won't go away, Martin, because they won't be able to get back because he's
and they won't go to hotels that they might have booked. They won't go to restaurants.
Sales, to get the sales on Boxing Day.
I think the strike is from 6 o'clock on the 24th to 6 a.m. on the 27th.
And that'll take another day after that.
Very few trains will be running on Christmas. What it will hit, actually, is that maintenance and engineering, where contracts will have already been signed by the companies. So if they don't get into talks to get the strikes lifted, you can get these
by the railway.
Well, I just think it's so interesting that he ruled it out.
Yeah, he did.
And then all of a sudden
he ruled it out because he was hoping for progress in talks. Now, he says there isn't
someone like that.
There isn't
makes a pledge. How can anybody negotiate with a man like that who makes a pledge on this programme and then 10 days later breaks it completely?
Because there was no progress.
To be fair, the whole point of negotiation is you have a position and you negotiate it and you move it. I'm not sure that there's any standardised pledging.
Well,
I'm not taking a side either way. But the
it
idea that in a
to the
negotiation...
public, it sounded
things are
like,
losable things.
don't worry, we won't strike.
We won't ruin your Christmas.
Because he was looking for progress.
Yeah, well,
and he says he hasn't got any progress with Mark Harper and the Raven
Right,
list.
well...
Ebenezer Scrooge and Grinch rolled into one.
Yeah, but
Still to come.
It's not going to get you anywhere.
Still to
shouting like
come. Still to come. Thank you, guys.
Andrew and Kevin are staying with us.